Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, to the Premier. This session, the Premier has done nothing but plough ahead with her own agenda to try and save herself and her party before the next election. Take Hydro, for example. The Premier went ahead with her wrong-headed Hydro Wynne sell-off, even though 80% of Ontarians are against it. Does the Premier think she knows more than 80% of Ontarians?
Mr. Speaker, I've had the opportunity over the last couple of days to talk about specifically the changes that we are making to labour laws and employment standards, Mr. Speaker, and to the minimum wage. And all of that, Mr. Speaker, is part of a plan. It's part of the reality that government, in my opinion, exists to help people. It exists to do things that we cannot do alone. Government exists to make society more fair. So whether that's free tuition for students who will see that this fall, over 200,000 students will go to college and university. They will get free or better than free tuition, Mr. Speaker. Whether it is cutting people's electricity bills, whether it's building 100,000 new childcare spaces, Mr. Speaker, or whether it's raising the minimum wage and making sure that part-time and full-time workers are paid the same, Mr. Speaker. All of that is about a fair Ontario. That's what we've been doing this session, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I'm not surprised the Premier doesn't want to talk about Hydro Wynne. Under this Liberal government, hydro rates have gone up by a staggering 300%. Under this Premier alone, rates have gone up 50%. Instead of doing something to fix the mess that she's helped create in our hydro system, the Premier signed Ontario families and businesses onto a $45 billion borrowing scheme that will cause our hydro bills to soar even higher. What does the Premier have to say to the people who will be hurt by her scheme?
Mr. Speaker, I know the member opposite. I know him quite well, and I know that he is committed to, for example, building transit, Mr. Speaker. I know that he believes in infrastructure building. I also know that he recognizes that over many years, because he knows a lot about the electricity system in Ontario, over many years, government after government did not make the investments in the electricity system in Ontario that were needed. The system was degraded. By the time we came into office in 2003 under the previous Premier, Mr. Speaker, there had to be investments in order to upgrade the system. We made those investments, Mr. Speaker, and we are paying now for those in this generation, and we believe that it is more fair to pay for those investments over a longer period of time. That's what we're doing in order that people can see some relief right now, and they will see that relief come this summer, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Speaker, indeed, I do know the system, and privatization is damaging the hydro in this province, damaging it. The Premier didn't even give the people of Ontario, or the opposition for that matter, reasonable time to have their say about her hydro scheme. She's ramming it through the House in a little over 2 weeks. 2 weeks for legislation that will affect our lives for 3 decades to come. Why does the Premier insist on limiting public input and opposition debate on our hydro scheme? What is she afraid of?
Mr. Speaker, there has been an enormous debate and discussion around this province about the cost of electricity. The member opposite knows that. We're moving forward to give people relief by this summer, Mr. Speaker, because we know that that will help people and it will help small businesses on main streets all over the province, Mr. Speaker. They will see a reduction in their electricity costs, and people in more rural and remote communities will see up to a 40 to 50% reduction, Mr. Speaker. I believe that it was an important decision to move ahead, Mr. Speaker. I also know that the broadening of the ownership of Hydro Wynne, Mr. Speaker, was part of our plan to invest in the people of this province, invest in infrastructure. We were not, as the member opposite is, I believe, Mr. Speaker, constrained by an ideology that says that never work with the private sector, do not trust the private sector, Mr. Speaker. I believe that the way society works is that government, private sector, civil society works together to improve the lot of lives in the people of Ontario.